Hello, and welcome to the Crypto Beat. My name is Tim Copeland, I'm the blog's editor-in-chief. Joining me today, we have Taiko CEO, Joaquin Izard, and Drew van der Werff, who's working on Comic Boost and Fabric. Welcome to the show. How are you all doing?
Very good, thanks.
Great. Happy Wednesday, everyone.
Brilliant. All right, well, before we get started, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Awaken, which is a crypto tax software provider. Make sure to use the code TheCryptoBeat for $25 of free credit.
The only thing worse than getting rugged by Haktua is doing crypto taxes. Meet Awaken, crypto tax software that actually works. Built for degens by degens. What's their magic? Maybe it's in their automatic integration with the most popular blockchains and exchanges. Maybe it's their custom support for more than 25,000 smart contracts, which allows them to label over 90% of your transactions for you. Or maybe it's their custom AI assistant that helps you label any transaction you're still not sure about. Still not convinced? It gets even better. This year, transactions on Solana, Base, Bitcoin, Hyperliquid, and Sui are 100% free. So stop using tax software that could be losing you money and get started with Awaken for free. Use code TheCryptoBeat for $25 off credit or click the link below.
Now, today's episode is around based rollups on Ethereum, and this is the second of a likely 4 episodes based on layer 2s that I've got in the works. So if you like layer 2s, look out for the next episodes. All right, so let's get started. So let's dive into it. What is a based rollup?
So I can take this one. A base rollup, well, it's important to put it into context. Like Ethereum offers a set of services. And well, if you use the settlement of Ethereum, you're a layer 2. If you use the DA of Ethereum, you're a rollup. So that's the first part. It uses the Ethereum data availability layer. If you use an alternative data availability, you are a Validium. If you use the sequencing of Ethereum, you are a based rollup. Using the sequencing of Ethereum means you are essentially using the layer 1 validators to sequence the transactions on layer 2. And then on top of all, if you use the execution, you are a native rollup, but there's no live native rollup yet in the market.
Okay, so what are the benefits of doing this? Like, why would you want to do a based rollup?
I'll take this one too, but because Taiko is a base rollup, there's actually a lot of benefits. There's also some drawbacks, to be honest. I would highlight essentially, well, first of all, if you are base sequence, you leverage all the decentralization of the layer 1 validators for the sequencing function, in contrast to other rollups that essentially have a centralized sequencer like Arbitrum, Optimism, which is a single point of failure. You also leverage the credible neutrality of Ethereum's set of validators. There's some extra points on security, but that's a different story. But most importantly, and I think this is kind of like why the base rollup narrative is hitting so much right now, is because in the future, all base rollups, when other conditions are met, will be synchronous composable with each other, which is kind of like the highest level of interoperability that you can have. Synchronously composable with each other and with Ethereum layer 1. Which is kind of like the end game for Ethereum scalability. That's why base rollups is important.
Yeah, and just from a user perspective, what that would look like is liquidity on the L1 can be leveraged in the L2 without the L2 needing the liquidity on the L2, for instance. And so I think a big challenge today is when you launch a rollup, you have to do a ton of BD around getting USDC on your rollup, getting Uniswap, getting Aave, all these things that have to come in to create the ecosystem you want. With a based rollup eventually in the future, that's what we're shooting for, is that you wouldn't have to do that. You could launch the rollup focused on the thing you want to focus on and tap into the rest of the ecosystem that's also based.
I'm curious to sort of understand how this works, because when I imagine layer 2, I sort of imagine quite a separate system where it's running on its own probably centralized sequencer for now. It gathers transactions, orders them, processes them, batches them, maybe throws a ZK proof on them, and then sort of submits that to the Ethereum blockchain. How do you have it where you have the rollup, so you're processing all of these transactions and it is off the main chain, but you've got the sort of the validators of the main chain, you're still sort of using that for at least the sequencing? Like, how does that work?
So the mechanism is actually quite similar. So you have a snark circuit, which is like the the hard part to build for well, in the case of CK rollups, in the case of optimistic rollups, this fraud proofs games. But it's quite similar, right? It's a rollup, so it also batches transactions together. It can potentially batch several blocks together, and then it gets sent to Ethereum. The only difference is that all this batching and the sequencing and everything that I just described in a base rollup is done by layer 1 validators, which again has also some inefficiencies that we can explain afterwards. And in the case of a centralized sequencer rollup, it's done by one party, one hardware, to put it that way.
Yeah. So are we talking that the validators opt into this system and that they choose to separately also like process this rollup, or is it somehow applied to sort of the main chain and it sort of makes all validators do it?
Validators can choose to run a Taiko node and sequence transactions on Taiko. But I want to make clear that as of today, there's two separate mempools. One is the Taiko. It's not the same public Ethereum mempool. There's the Taiko mempool where the transactions are sitting until they are picked up by the validator, and then the block is created and then it's sent to the Ethereum layer 1, like any other block coming from a layer 2. So the working dynamics of the base rollups is quite similar in a way from a technical standpoint to any other rollup.
And then, so Drew, what is Comet Boost and Fabric, the two projects you're working on?
Yeah, and how these talk about that and how they tie into base rollups. So Commit Boost was the first effort that we helped start. Basically, I left my job last year because I was excited about this concept of proposer commitments, which pre-comps and the base sequencing ties into that. And the main question I was asking myself is there a way to use Ethereum's million plus validators in a different way than we have historically thought about? And why I was asking myself this is when you think about Ethereum and its evolution over time, when it first started, we really didn't think of it as a DA layer. We didn't think about it as a sequencer, and so these are sort of like monumental shifts and opportunities that people can build around. And I thought this was a great opportunity. And so left to build, Commit Boost and Fabric are both part of a nonprofit, public goods, no token or monetization, no even venture funding directly. It's all grant from the ecosystem. And Commit Boost is a new sidecar that validators run where they can provide commitments such as pre-confirmations, but also other things around block construction. And the simplest way to think about this is today we have Mev Boost. People think about that as one thing, but it's really two. It's a software validators run, and it's a protocol that validators use to communicate with relays with builders with relays, and relays back to proposers. And so Commit Boost is just the software piece. It doesn't standardize or impact the downstream protocols that come in. But what it allows for is you run one software, this sidecar Commit Boost, and it allows you to opt into many different protocols. So now you can not only opt into the PBS pipeline, which is historically what we know as Mev Boost, the way 90+% of blocks are built today, but you can also opt into pre-confirmation protocols, and you can run these in parallel. And then we expect there to be other types of block construction commitments that come up. This could be things like inclusion list. This could be block space features. This could be just top of block auction. There's a whole host of ideas around this that people are getting towards. And probably the earliest research around this was a concept called Pepsi out of the RAG group of the EF. This is sort of an out of protocol implementation of Pepsi. And so what Commit Boost is used for in the context, of base sequencing is there are 4 or 5 teams building on Commit Boost, these pre-comp protocols. And I'll get into why pre-comps are important for base sequencing. There's one major drawback of base sequencing today and why you'd want pre-confirmations. But before that, Fabric, it was a continuation of Commit Boost. Basically, the main mission of Commit Boost was to provide standardization. So we didn't have a bunch of sidecars flying around, but we could have one and you can opt into all these things as a proposer. Similarly with Fabric, we've seen a flourishing of the L2 ecosystem with time. We've seen now a year or so of research and development done by teams like Taiko, but many others in the ecosystem. And we got to a place where we sort of understood the key challenges. We may not have the full solutions, but for a good chunk of it, we're in a place where we can agree at least that, hey, this is be a great place to standardize. This is a place not to standardize. This is a place people can compete. This is a place for public good. Hey, this is an open research problem that we need more time on. So what Fabric is it's trying to rally everyone together and develop minimal viable reference implementations around a based rollup, not the full stack, but different parts of it. And so that's sort of the efforts to unite people. And where we focused initially in Fabric is around pre-confirmations. And so for pre-confirmations to work, you got to extend the PBS pipeline that we have today. And so some of the initial efforts that we have going and already have worked on for months now, those are in place. And so with that in mind, let me talk a little bit about pre-confirmation. So with base rollups, you're constrained by the block time of the L1. So today, when you use Optimism, Arbitrum, these rollups, you're used to 1 second, millisecond confirmations. It's very different than when you use Ethereum. When you become base today, what happens is you're bounded by the slot time. So 12 seconds is the fastest you could really get a base rollup transaction confirmed in. And so what researchers and others came up with was this concept of pre-confirmations. And so what happens is that L1 proposer opts into giving a pre-confirmation, and the L2 transaction uses that pre-confirmation that they now have as a way to get inclusion. And so it's like a pre-commitment. And it's similar like when you swipe a credit card at Starbucks. You swipe it, Starbucks says, here's your coffee, we have your money. But in reality, what happens is the settlement of the money doesn't happen for a few days, but you had that pre-confirmation with the swipe of your credit card. And there's a process around trust that happens in this with, it's secured by economics, at least in this permissionless setting. But that's kind of the best way to think about it. And obviously, it's not a 2-day period in Ethereum. It's probably within 6 to 7 minutes, depending on the epoch and where you're at. But we won't get to those technical details. But that's probably the best way to think about it.
Okay, so is the core idea that, let's say you're a validator, you make a pre-commitment, but then let's say like an airdrop happens, there's loads of bigger transactions, you want to get through them first, and then you make sure to get back to that other one, complete what you committed to, so you don't get like slashed, for instance.
Yeah, and the way it flows is a transaction on the L2. This is really high level, and I'm going to skip over a lot of the details, but someone on the L2 wants a transaction to come through, and it's a based rollup. What they can do is submit a request for a pre-confirmation. And this eventually makes its way to a validator in the next epoch. So there's this look-ahead period in Ethereum you can see. And a validator says, hey, someone wants this pre-conf, I will issue them a pre-conf now. And so, time goes on, then once it's the validator slot who issued the pre-conf, what they end up doing is communicating this through commit boost that, hey, relay, make sure you tell the builder when he constructs the rest of my block that I already sold this pre-confirmation and it must be included. And so the relay tells the builder that, the builder receives that, they build the block just like they do today, they take into account the pre-confirmation, they make sure that's packaged in the block, and then when they return the block, today they just return what's called a block header, but what they do with the pre-confirmation is they return the block header plus the proof that they included the pre-confirmation that was requested, and the validator then receives that, and they sign off on the block and all as well.
So does this create like a new revenue for validators, or a new source of revenue for validators?
Yeah, I'll answer that, and then Joaquin may have had something, but
No. To answer that question, that correct can be a new source of revenue. I just wanted to add something on top because sometimes I get this question. It's very basics, but I get this question a lot. So to clarify, there's a difference between confirmation and finality, and what we're talking about here is the confirmation of the transaction, which doesn't mean that it has been included in an Ethereum block, which would make the transaction final. And the best example that Drew mentioned before is Arbitrum, Optimism. You have sub-second confirmation experience, but they are optimistic rollups. And by definition, there's a challenge period that takes days. I don't know how many days, like 7 days or something like that. So, and it's not final until that happens. But from a user experience standpoint, it feels like it's finalized, like if you buy the coffee on a Starbucks. So that's the beauty of this. And something else to add on top, which is in my opinion, a big difference between, and Drew also mentioned it already, is a big difference between these base pre-confirmations that we are talking about and the current pre-confirmations that have been live in ecosystems or projects like Arbitrum and Optimism in the past, is that these pre-confirmations are trustless, are secured by economics. The other pre-confirmations are, how would I say, like reputation based. Like because Arbitrum has a centralized sequencer, they have all the power, but you have to trust them that they are not going to censor your transaction and that whatever they promise you as a pre-confirmation will essentially happen. In this case, there is economics involved. So there's some, risk taking and slashing mechanisms that can happen if the validator don't fulfill the promise. So it's kind of like a stronger guarantee, in my opinion.
Yeah, and just back to the monetization side of things, there's various research out there that you're kind of guessing the future in some way. So it's a big TBD. There's some folks that have estimated very large increases in yield for validators. There's some that have say you're going to lose money. I tend to rely on traditional finance in some ways, where you have a very long history of commodity markets develop over time, where first they start with spot or like the physical commodity itself, and then over time you have these futures contracts, you have these forward contracts. And I'm not saying pre-confirmations are derivatives, but there's certainly this evolution that takes place. And if you look at oil companies today, for instance, a large chunk of their revenue is driven actually from their trading activities, their ability to hedge in a way when oil is up and they have certain views on things. And so that's a big part of how their business ends up evolving. Maybe that's what we'll see with the proposer set today, eventually evolving towards that, or some actor that proposer delegates to doing that work for them, and they still are kind of quote unquote dumb pipes that just sit there.
I'm curious, Drew. Like one quick question: what is the arguments for the ones that say that validators may lose money? Because at the end of the day, like users are paying a tip to get their transactions pre-confirmed. Is it because they need to run extra hardware that may not offset or not may be sufficient to or covered by the tip paid by the user, or what, or is there any other argument for that?
Yeah, these are studies, they're really mathematical and based on historical data, but the conceptually, I think the thing people ground themselves in is a just-in-time auction should always bring more value than an auction over time, just because you have that bidding process that then takes place. And so that's some of what people are grounding in. The ones that say higher, at least the particular research paper I'm thinking about, they used Black-Scholes and volatility and used historicals for that based on the price of ETH and gas to estimate these things. So again, a lot of this is just financial modeling or using like historical data to try to inform the future, but it's kind of a TBD on where we land around this. There certainly are validators that are willing to opt into these things, and there are teams testing in Haleski and working towards mainnet. So I think there's appetite for this that we'll see over the next few months, but a bit of TBD on how that will all work out.
And how much momentum is there for base rollups? Like, are there a lot of projects doing this? Is there a lot of like sort of general support in the community for this sort of thing?
I would say the momentum is heating up. This concept was proposed first by Justin Drake in, correct me if I'm wrong, March 2023, maybe? That's the ETH research post date? Yeah, something like that. So Taiko is the first one. I'm not sure if it's the only one live in production. There's certainly more teams working on base rollups like Puffer, like Spire, even Linear and Scroll have said that they are willing to explore, or actually even in the last sequencing call of Ethereum, you were part of it, Drew. I think most of the teams said that eventually they could explore being a base rollup. So I guess the momentum is nice, but there's still the drawbacks of base rollups are needs to be fixed in order to be attractive for others to join us.
Could you see like Optimism or Arbitrum chains becoming base rollups?
I think so in the future. I mean, I can get deep on why I think based is kind of like the end game. Well, I'm gonna do it. Okay, I'll try to explain it as clear as possible. I think they will become base rollups because at the end of the day, so Ethereum in the beginning was one chain, so it was not fragmented. The user experience from a composability or interoperability standpoint was perfect because it was only one chain, but it wasn't scalable. So then the rollup-centric roadmap came, and a bunch of rollups have been created, and scalability issue has more or less been solved. But the problem is that a new issue has been created, which is the fragmentation between all these rollups, and you need to rely on bridges and blah, blah, blah. That's a problem. So how do we fix this fragmentation? There's two elements that you need. One is a search sequencer, and the other one is instant CK proofs. Share sequencer already exists. You have base sequencer, or you can have any other sequencer that you share with other ecosystem, like the superchain is building or others. And instant CK proofs, it's not available yet. The thing is, so when you get these two elements, all the chains that are sequenced by the same sequencer and that enjoy instant CK proofs will be completely interoperable with each other, which is called synchronous composability. But you need to choose which is the best sequencer for all these different rollups to tap into, right? And you could say that optimism sequencer is the best one, and and eventually all the chains tap into this sequencer, and interoperability happens within the superchain. Could be a plausible scenario, but in my opinion, I don't see, like, for example, Arbitrum or CKSync tapping into the superchain and trusting that optimism neutrality will be good enough, like credible neutrality. So that's a problem. Another problem is that it's not like the security guarantees and the liveness guarantees are not as strong as Ethereum overall, Ethereum set of validators. So if you think about it, at the end of the day, the only truly like credibly neutral, super decentralized, secure sequencer that I can think of to actually allow all this interoperability that I explained before is Ethereum. So whenever all these drawbacks of base rollups are fixed on user experience and Ethereum scales itself, I don't see a possibility, a future where where interoperability and fragmentation is solved via a different sequencer than Ethereum. So I think eventually it will happen. Every rollup will be a base rollup, but maybe I'm wrong.
From my perspective, I think when we started the pre-confirmation and base sequencing call, Justin constantly pulls up a slide with the teams that are focused on this. And I think it started with probably 6 teams, maybe. That slide now that you can barely read the logos, I suspect there's probably over a couple dozen teams that are working on various parts of this. And so there has been a lot of momentum. I think late last year, there was a lot more people sort of starting to understand some of the vision that was being painted, and still some criticisms and pushback from teams, which some are fair, some are just lack of education. And part of Fabric's effort is to improve that. I think if you tried to find just a picture of a base rollup stack, maybe there's something out there, but it's very difficult to find. And so even there was a team at Chiang Mai as part of a sprint we did that had baserollup.org launched. We're going to sort of refresh that, improve it, try to get things out there that people can take a look at and really understand. Here's the boxes and arrows. I'm not super technical. How does this work? And that should help diffuse some of this, or at least get the conversation to be more accurate when critics are pointing out challenges with things. And then from a rollup perspective, based on all the conversations we had, so part of Fabric's effort is to try to get everyone to work together to agree to these. And there's 2 users, I'd say. One is getting current L2s to become based, or at least have the opportunity to assess that. And the second is, if you're launching a based rollup, here's a couple tools you can use to get you going. It's not intended to be highly optimized. I don't anticipate really anyone taking the Fabric quote unquote reference implementations and just running a based rollup on that. They're going to have to do their own things, work with teams. That our intention wasn't to compete with anyone. So that's what the path we're going down on that side. But I would say rollups in the spectrum. There's, I think mid last year there were some that were saying this was a horrible idea. Don't ever do this. I think maybe there's a couple that still sit there, but largely there's 2 spectrums. There's teams like Taiko that are all in. And on the other side, you have teams. I won't name any rollups, but that say, hey, we'd be based if it makes sense. And they want to see some implementations happen that don't ruin their user experience, that actually make sense. And in the middle, I would say there's teams that say, hey, we're really interested in being based. We're even willing to fund a team to go explore how to change our stack to do that. But we're not going to focus on it as part of our core team. And so I think that's the spectrum I somewhat see out there.
Yeah, so you've got some like issues in terms of them being like base rollups not being as good as other rollups in terms of like speed and like TPS. What what is the path forward to addressing those issues and making them as good as like Optimism, CK Sync, and the others?
Well, I can talk to you about the issues that we are facing at Taiko. Maybe I leave some of them outside, but in our architecture, we are of course facing the speed issue. As Drew said in the beginning, you can be as fast as one Ethereum block in a base rollup. In our case, we're even slower than that. It usually takes like 30 seconds to 1 minute to confirm one transaction to a user, which is a terrible user experience. The reason is because, well, first of all, we actually, it could be even worse. Let's put it this way. We actually have our proposers or layer one validators. We are actually running one of them because if we couldn't run one proposer, the user experience could be even worse because posting data from base rollups to Ethereum is less efficient or more expensive than if you do it from a centralized rollup. And I can expand on why later, but the thing is, if we exclusively rely on community proposers or anyone that permissionlessly run a Taiko node, it could take several minutes to propose blocks. Why? Because they need to wait until they are completely full of transactions in order for those validators to get profit out of validating blocks or proposing blocks on the Taiko network. And sometimes it takes like 2-3 minutes or something like that, which would be like the end for our chain. So what we are doing with our proposer is constantly every 30 seconds to 1 minute, we are proposing blocks, even if they are empty, even if we lose money, for the sake of maintaining a decent user experience for our users. So that's one problem that will be fixed with pre-confirmations. With pre-confirmations, the user experience will be solved by default. So it doesn't matter if we propose the block every 30 seconds or every 5 minutes. The user experience is good by default with pre-confirmations. And the second issue that I more or less already mentioned is the price. Base rollups, at least Taiko, as of today, is a little bit more expensive for the users than other rollups. On average, it takes like I don't know. I made a couple of transactions today. It was 7 cents each transaction, which is not bad at all. It's much cheaper than Ethereum, but it's definitely more expensive than Arbitrum, for example. And one of the reasons is that is what I said before, right? The inefficiency when we send blocks to Ethereum. We actually send more blocks than needed to ensure this user experience, which essentially means that we are overpaying, and that at the end of the day, that could translate into the user. And there's also, because we don't have a centralized sequencer, we cannot enjoy the full power that it gives you, and this full power essentially can allow Arbitrum or other rollups to use more efficient batching techniques. They can propose blocks to Ethereum. I don't know, they can batch like 100 blocks together and then propose them to Ethereum, which we are not doing. We are essentially proposing every single block separately to Ethereum, which is more expensive for us and for the user overall. Again, this could potentially also be fixed with pre-confirmations, but that's another story. So I would say those are the two main drawbacks from Taiko's perspective. I don't know, Drew, if you know others.
No, I think that's right. There's some technical developments that have to happen too before we can really enjoy the vision that has laid out, in 2023 by Justin around synchronous composability. And for that, you need things like real-time proving, which will develop. And so the way I see base sequencing, it's likely going to develop a lot in parallel with things like what Josh is doing at the EF around interoperability standards. And I suspect we're going to have a couple tools in our tool shed, if you will, that rollups can use to make sure there is interoperability. As soon as we have real-time proving, this starts to collapse and become incredibly powerful, which it'll take a bit of time. I don't know the latest around all that, but it's certainly not there today, and likely will take a bit of time for us to get to.
Okay. And I've seen some chatter recently about the idea of native rollups. What's your takes on whether that would be a good thing, and how sort of plausible they are?
You want to take it, Drew?
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's a lot less contentious, at least seemingly from the community. There's a lot of rollups that are across the board that would lean into that and support it. There's huge benefits you get from this. And so this, though, in parallel with base sequencing, they're very orthogonal or complementary. And there's actually a meme about if you're native plus base to your ultrasound rollup. I think M Team or might have started this, Matthew from Spire. And so there is a complementary aspects, but you can be native and non-based, for instance. So it's not like you have to have both. And we may end in a place where that's the case, but kind of see how this progresses. But there's less contentious around this because of particularly the security type of things. You benefit much less bugs in your rollup or risk of it, like things like that are super beneficial to the teams building these things.
And with projects like Uniswap bringing out like an app chain rollup, Unichain, do we need to make it easier for layer 2s to connect to one another? Like if we're kind of going to go like the Cosmos route where like every app is on its own layer 2, like how do we make it more streamlined so people aren't constantly like bridging and needing to find the native token of the native rollup, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, the Cosmos one is a good example. That's asynchronous composability. Yeah, we definitely like if synchronous composability is a thing in the future, which as we mentioned before, is still not a thing because you need a real-time CK proofs. We have TEs as a training wheel, but that's not that doesn't offer the same level of security than CK proofs. When synchronous composability is a thing, I'm a big fan of the upchain thesis, because why would I launch in CKSync or any rollup as an application if I can launch my own app chain and enjoy the interoperability with all the rest of the base rollups? If we're thinking about the synchronous composability by all being a base sequence, why would I launch my app in a different rollup? I will launch an app chain and I will enjoy all the interoperability. I would be able to access liquidity from other rollups that are under the same cluster. So it's not the case today. So that's why the app chain thesis right now is not so strong. And again, as you mentioned, every new app chain that launches, they have the problem of being a new isolated island in the ocean of rollups that are only connected by bridges, which is, as we all know, one of the weakest points in the chain.
Yeah, I think from my view, again, base rollups are exciting, and I definitely believe they're in the future and investing a lot to help push that forward. But I do see in my mind, like a practical perspective, is there's probably some parallel push with base sequencing, providing some of the composability we hear, along with things like intents, along with some of the interops working groups that are happening, and some of the standardization that happens around inbox contracts, bridging, messaging, and these will probably push in parallel together. And once we have real-time proving, and particularly native rollups, there's this combination of these things that it does become more like a seamless experience, even better than what you see today in Web 2, where you could think of different banks as quote unquote rollups, and to get money to the other bank, it's quite difficult, or there is friction there. But this will be maybe not within block type transacting, but at least much quicker than what we see in the way money moves today.
And how do we think Ethereum's sort of vertical scaling strategy is holding up against Solana's horizontal strategy these days?
From my perspective, there's a finite limit when you vertically integrate, and maybe they've already experienced some of that already. And sure, you can increase hardware and you can do these things, but at some point there's still some physical limit. And so I very much still buy into the Ethereum thesis, why I still build in this ecosystem. Now, there have been challenges around this. It's much easier to vertically or have these centralized or pseudo-centralized node providers that are highly sophisticated doing these things. But take a long bet on this that we'll get to a much better place. And I think a lot of the efforts that teams are, even the fact that L2s are willing to come and join things like Fabric, join things like the interoperability working group, I think there's just a lot of appetite from teams to really lean into this. What has become very clear in my conversations around the L1 is there does still need to be scaling, particularly around blobs. I can't remember where Jesse said this, but he wants to see 10x from where we're at today from blobs, and that may not even be enough. I think the world chain, I forget who it was, but he was talking about by end of year, they anticipate, even with the hard fork that we're about to experience, I think they alone anticipate consuming, I think he said like 60% of the blob space, and that's just one roll up. And so I do think Ethereum needs to lean into this. PeerDAS has been a big topic of discussion, and even just a hard fork specific for blobs has been discussed. So I think there's some education that needed, some like shouting from L2s to make sure core devs understood this, and core devs starting to grasp this. And I do expect the next year we see some prioritization towards this, but this is just my personal view and me guessing.
Yep. Just to add on top, I think this meme of the layer 3 layer, 10 layer, 200 will not happen anymore. Actually, the Ethereum roadmap, if you think about it, it's an horizontal scaling rather than vertical scaling. Even like native rollups enable parallel execution. So yeah, I think the comparison is fair with Solana, but I think we're gearing towards a similar kind of scalability when we are able to achieve all these things that are not ready yet that we have mentioned before.
Okay, and there's been one issue in terms of there's a lot more layer 2s, a lot more activity, but a lot of that value isn't being sort of captured towards ETH, especially sort of with the introduction of blobs. Is that something that sort of layer 2s should be sort of trying to address?
That's true. There's been like the debate that layer 2s are parasitic to Ethereum. I don't know if you are referring to that. It's actually not super. It's true to some extent, in my opinion, but it's not super true because most of the revenue made by validators is not MEV. It's other stuff like AdStation and other stuff. What the rollups are capturing and not giving back to Ethereum is specifically this MEV, which according to Justin Drake is going to be going to zero for several reasons. So it's not going to be a problem anymore in the future. But as of today, I know that rollups like Base are making literally millions of that. In the case of Base rollups, we are giving up all the MEV for the layer 1 validators because we are sequenced by the base layer. So in our case, we are definitely not parasitic to Ethereum.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think the future vision is that rollups, a majority of their revenue is driven by transaction fees. At least this is what Justin and I think others rely on, and that MEV, as it will probably, it will continue to exist. It will get closer to the app layer. So either it will be going back to users, the applications themselves, and apps could be rollups. So TBD on how all this works, but at least there'll be some component of this. And what ends up happening is majority of the revenue, though, in the end is just transaction fees. And then the idea is Ethereum horizontally scales. And there's so many rollups using Ethereum that it's well compensated for that. Even there's a smaller piece of the pie that's going to the L1. It's still very large in the context of how many rollups are building on Ethereum. I think there's been a lot of debate late last year, maybe half of last year. Maybe it's seen less this year. We'll see on the new Ethereum AMA or the research AMA. But there have been people even like Dankrad and others questioning, what is the value of DA and this whole debate. So still think a bit of TBD, but the positive thing is they're aware of it at least and can think about it.
We're talking about data availability. Like there's been a lot of talk about modularity over like the last year. Is this something that layer 2 should be embracing more of or less? Like obviously that has some impact on the value capture, how much like they affect fees on the mainnet.
From our perspective, I think the term modularity is kind of like the modular is blurred sometimes. I think being a rollup is already can already be considered modular. There's degrees of modularity, of course, if you use a different projects for different things or different protocols. In our case, we try to keep it as simple as possible, and we rely on Ethereum for data availability for several reasons. And I think using an alternative data availability introduces new security assumptions. And as far as I know, and maybe you correct me if I'm wrong, using an alternative DA breaks composability because, for example, Celestia has its own sequencer, which again, you will be breaking the monopoly of sequencing from Ethereum in our case as a base rollup. So there's much more pros than cons for our project, for Taiko. I can't speak for others to use Ethereum DA instead of an alt DA.
Yeah, and that's right to an extent on the DA side of things.
Drew, your project works quite closely with the Ethereum Foundation. Do you have any ideas on what's going on with this sort of like potential leadership shakeup that we've sort of seen alluded to?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, you can sense when you speak with people, there's a bit of unease. It's a question of whether that's driven by the Ethereum Foundation itself or just in the community. I mean, let's be honest, there's a lot on crypto Twitter. People see this. It does create unease. Obviously, ETH hasn't performed as well as other tokens. We've seen this in the past, though, before, where this has taken place, and truly have seen the community rise above. And at least from my personal perspective, I somewhat put my head in the sand, always aware of things happening. And given my background, like you'll clearly see, like, taking other people's perspectives in and adjusting my thesis is part of what made my career what it is. And so I'm not ignoring it. It's just at some points you somewhat got to ignore the noise. You got to have the long-term thesis, keep taking information in and adjusting. But it is hard. And so I think there's people that do some of that as well. But yeah, so there seems to be unease among folks. I don't know if it's driven by what's happening at the Ethereum Foundation or just the community overall. But yeah, I'm not really sure all the things that are taking place there.
All right. Well, that's all we have for today. I want to thank Joaquin for joining this episode, plus Drew. It was really informative, all about base rollups. And thanks to our sponsor, Awaken Tax. Make sure to follow the Crypto Beat on Twitch and Spotify. Subscribe to the Block Pods on YouTube. And as a reminder, our newsroom works tirelessly to get you accurate, informed crypto news. If you want to stay ahead, make sure to read the Block. Thanks, everyone, and see you next time.